I still remember the exact moment she said it. We were in her cramped office, wall-to-wall textbooks, laminated posters of the periodic table and grammatical tense charts. My final junior year conference with Mrs. Holloway, the English teacher infamous for her razor-sharp pen and her even sharper tongue. I'd breezed into her classroom that spring morning, humming a tune, clutching my portfolio of short stories, naively convinced she'd celebrate my acceptance into the university's creative writing program. Instead, she sighed, leaned back in her squeaky swivel chair, and tapped her fingers against the mahogany desk. "Connor," she said, without looking up, "you'll never be anything." That moment ricocheted in my head, over and over, until even the ping of the hallway clock felt like a gong tolling my literary doom. I'd traded a half-smile with the guidance counselor outside, then trudged home, portfolio heavy in my backpack, my cheeks hot enough to toast bread. That summer, I devoured her words, "You'll never be anything." At the beach, I watched my friends surf glimmering waves. I felt the current pulling me under. I applied to every writing workshop in sight, and got rejection after rejection, until I clipped a notice for a small press looking for educational material. I'd always loved explaining things, splitting infinitives, extricating metaphor from muddy prose. So I pitched a grammar handbook, disguised as short stories, something to make students groan with recognition, rather than gawk at jargon. I heard crickets, until one crisp August evening, my inbox pinged. "We'd like to see a sample chapter." My heartbeat roared. I spent the next 2 days crafting a playful lesson on subject-verb agreement, complete with detective-themed excerpts where the suspect's verb kept running when it should have ran. I mailed it in, electronic stamps and all, praying my words would land better than my stories. Weeks later, I got a terse acceptance. "Congratulations. We'll need your full manuscript in 6 weeks." I looped my arms around myself and danced across the living room. My mother, sipping iced tea, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. My younger sister, Lily, cheered until milk came out her nose. For the first time in my life, I felt capable. The next 2 years were a blur of coffee shops, library cubicles, and late-night editing marathons. I wrote chapters on apostrophes, the case of the missing possessive, semicolons, the semicolon standoff, and dangling modifiers, when the snapping turtle inked the paper. I sent updates to my editor, a kindly woman named Marisol, who peppered her emails with exclamation points. I love the detective angle. Every acceptance of a revised draft felt like one more brick in a wall I was constructing, against doubt, against that one fateful afternoon, with Mrs. Holloway. In November, Grammar Sleuth, a whodunit approach to English, was published by Oak Avenue Press. My name went on the cover in bold serif typeface, Connor James. I held the first copy in my hands, like an infant, tiny paperback, cool ink smell, the promise of thousands of students inside. When the first orders trickled in, teacher supply stores, Amazon sales, direct orders from high school English departments, I celebrated quietly. I imagined Mrs. Holloway, scrolling through her emails and finding Grammar Sleuth in her mailbox. Would she read it? Would she scoff? Would she finally admit she'd been wrong? That spring, 3 years after her damning verdict, I paced backstage at the New England Educational Convention. Hundreds of educators milled around, booths selling colorful posters, tables stacked with sparkly pens, hands shaking from cheerful nerves. A sign overhead read, "Keynote Address, the Future of English Education." On stage, a man in a crisp blazer tapped the microphone. Next up, Connor James, author of Grammar Sleuth. My palms sweat. Lily, now a college freshman, sidled up beside me, beaming. "You ready?" she whispered. Her lipstick was bright as sunrise. She'd curled my hair in loose waves. "You're going to slay." I nodded, swallowed. Behind me, I heard 2 teachers at the booth for a competing textbook, sniffing, "Who's Connor James? Never heard of him. Probably one of those self-published hacks." I inhaled sharply. Self-published hacks. The echo of "you'll never be anything" rattled in my skull. I flicked my gaze to the stage light shining through the curtain. This was my moment. My name rang out, and I strode onto the stage, wood creaking under dress shoes, lights blooming around me like dawn. The auditorium lights dimmed. A spotlight followed me forward. Rows of chairs stretched into the darkness, each seat a pair of expectant eyes. I touched the podium. "Good morning," I began, voice steadier than I felt. "I'm honored to be here. Today, I want to talk about reimagining grammar for the digital age, making it less about rote rules and more about stories we tell every time we write." The audience leaned forward, And as I clicked through slides, scene stills from my detective chapters, a video clip of a classroom using my puzzles, they laughed at the jokes, took notes, asked questions. Every nod, every chuckle, every engaged remark chipped away at the memory of that blazing desk. After 40 minutes, I concluded, grammar isn't a set of shackles, it's a toolkit. When we unlock its mysteries, we empower students to write with confidence and creativity. Thank you. The applause swelled. I felt tears sting my eyes. I swept a glance across the first few rows, rows upon rows of educators who'd given me their attention. I'd become something, an authority, a storyteller, an agent of change. Backstage, I shook hands and signed copies of Grammar Sleuth. One by one, teachers, department chairs, even a dean thanked me. Your approach is revolutionary, one said. My students are actually excited about grammar for the first time. Another, I'm adopting it as our standard textbook. Each word felt like a ticket punched on the journey from doubt to resounding triumph. In the corner, I spotted Mrs. Holloway, older now, salt and pepper hair bobbing at her shoulders, a tweed jacket and sensible loafers. She stood alone, gripping her copy of my book as though it were fragile china. Our eyes met, my heart stuttered. She gave me a small smile, a fragile bridge across our past. I stepped off the signing table and walked toward her. She set her book aside, clasped her hands. Connor, she said, voice quiet. I'm sorry, I never meant. It's okay, I interrupted gently. You said what you said, but look where we are. She brushed at her eyes. I'm proud of you. Truly, your textbook is life-changing. I nodded, throat tight. Thank you. I paused. Maybe one day you'll teach with it? She blinked, surprised. I'd like that. I smiled, bright, real, final. See you in your classroom then. As I walked away, clutching my worn copy of Grammar Sleuth, dog-eared pages, underlined passages, I felt whole. I'd turned her doubt into my greatest lesson. And though the road from that stormy conference room to this sunlit stage had been long and winding, I'd discovered something vital. Sometimes the best textbook is one you write yourself, and the greatest revenge is teaching the doubters exactly what you've become. And this was only the first chapter. I remember the morning after the New England Educational Convention as one of the most surreal of my life. I woke before dawn, slung on my faded denim jacket, and let myself out onto the dewy lawn behind my modest New Hampshire farmhouse. My paperback of Grammar Sleuth lay on the bench by the back door, its cover softened by summer's humidity, and I carried it with me as I wandered to the patch of wild raspberries I'd planted last year. As I picked one ruby-tinged berry, I thought, I never dreamed this book would lead me here. The grasshoppers whispered in the tall grasses, the sky was a pale lavender. I thumbed through the pages, my own words, like old friends, until I found the dedications. For Mrs. Holloway, who taught me to read between the lines, and for every student who dared to dream. I'd never expected her name to appear there, but after she asked to teach from Grammar Sleuth, I'd insisted. It was my way of closing the circle. That morning, I had an early Zoom meeting with a teacher in rural Ohio who'd used my detective drama approach to rescue her class from grammar fatigue. Then I planned to drive into town for coffee with my mentor, Dr. Warren Nguyen, who'd guided me through my dissertation on narrative pedagogy. All of it, these connections, this network of educators who'd built themselves on my textbook, had sprouted from those two words, you'll never be anything. A week later, I stepped into Lincoln Middle School's auditorium, where 30 teachers in mismatched cardigans and sneakers gathered for the statewide Innovative Instruction Workshop. The scent of chalk and stale popcorn lingered in the air. I'd been invited to speak on transforming grammar through story, wary yet thrilled. My heart still fluttered at the sight of so many familiar faces. Miss Patel from Ohio, Mr. Delgado from Texas, Miss Rodriguez from California, each one a success story I'd helped to write. I clicked the remote. A slide projected on the screen. Lesson 5, Commas Save Lives, and Oxford Saves Universes. The teachers chuckled. I launched in. Have you ever met a sentence so tangled it looked like a knot in Grandma's yarn basket? I asked, pacing the stage. Comma placement can mean the difference between let's eat, Grandma, and let's eat Grandma. And trust me, the logic here matters. I wove in anecdotes from Grammar Sleuth. The detective who decoded a ransom note full of missing commas. The hapless suspect nearly jailed because of a misused semicolon. The audience was rapt. I saw heads nod, pens scribble, hands shoot up with questions. At one point, a teacher in the front row, recently a skeptic, raised her hand. "How do you adapt these stories for ALL students?" she asked, voice hopeful. I smiled. "Great question. Let me show you." I clicked to a slide of a bilingual excerpt, the detective's clue hidden in both English and Spanish, inviting students to bridge languages. As we broke into small groups to workshop the idea, I realized my dream had taken root far beyond my own classroom. It lived in every school willing to embrace narrative. That afternoon, I drove home through golden fields, replaying the workshop in my mind. The drive from the middle school to my farmhouse was a gentle winding road dotted with apple orchards and pick-your-own-berry stands. I thought of my own students, my daughter Lily, who struggled with dyslexia, and my nephew Sam, who wrote me poems in cursive so choppy they looked like hieroglyphs. Grammar Sleuth hadn't just been a book. I'd written it to reach them, to show them that language could be playful, alive, and forgiving. When I reached home, my phone buzzed with a text from my editor, Marisol, LifeSprout Publishers. "Connor, sales of Grammar Sleuth just hit 50,000. You're trending #1 in education and reference. Want to discuss a second edition?" My breath caught. 50,000 copies. I popped the trunk and extracted my week's haul of mail. Advanced chapters for a proposed Grammar Sleuth activity workbook, and an invitation to present at the National Council of Teachers of English conference in November. I could hardly keep my hands from trembling as I texted back, "Yes, I'm ready. Let's do this." That evening, I poured myself a glass of Malbec and curled up on the porch swing with my manuscript notes. Fireflies lit the gathering dusk. I thumbed through the list of proposed new chapters, interactive exercises, graphic novel-style comic strips, a chapter on digital punctuation in texts and tweets. I tapped my pen. Time to write the next chapter, for Lily, for Sam, for every kid told they'd never be anything. October brought a whirlwind of events. My sister Lily and I flew to Chicago to unpack boxes at a pop-up Grammar Sleuth bookstore event. We arrived midday to banners fluttering in the autumn breeze. Meet Connor James, author of the #1 grammar textbook. Kids in pigtails and oversized glasses clutched copies as I signed them. Parents beamed, teachers snapped selfies. Lily grabbed my hand. "I think they know me too," she giggled. That same week, I delivered the keynote at the NCTE conference in Baltimore. On stage at the cavernous convention center, I spoke to a packed auditorium about narrative grammar, technology integration, and the need for teacher-authored resources. As I closed with, "When you give students a reason to read, they'll discover a reason to write," the crowd rose in a standing ovation. I felt tears well in my eyes again, only this time they were gratitude, not hurt. By November, my publisher flew me to New York for a feature in Publishers Weekly and a morning TV segment on innovators in education. I stood before bright lights and booming cameras, describing how a frustrated teenager's revenge became a movement to reawaken grammar in classrooms nationwide. I held up the latest edition, Grammar Sleuth, revised and expanded second edition, and felt a surge of pride that still caught me off guard. Back in New Hampshire, the weather turned cold. Frost edged the windows. I ducked into my sunlit writing studio, transformed from the old dining room with exposed beams and turquoise walls, where my laptop sat beside a stack of colorful sticky notes and the well-worn first edition of Grammar Sleuth. I was drafting Chapter 12 of the activity workbook, the case of the run-on sentence. I heard the front door open and looked up to see Mrs. Holloway herself, smiling and tucking her scarf into her trench coat. "Good afternoon, Mr. James," she said softly. "I hope I'm not intruding." I jumped up. "Mrs. Holloway, of course not." We embraced in a quick hug. "It's wonderful to see you." She smiled, eyes misting. "I just wanted to thank you in person. One of my colleagues encouraged me to use the second edition in my advanced classes. I was hesitant, shouldn't I have authored my own?" She chuckled. "But your work is remarkable. You've given me and my students a new lease on everything." I gestured to the old wooden rocker by the window. "Please, sit. Tea?" She settled in, peeking at the sticky note sketches. "You're working on the workbook." Her gaze was warm. "I wanted to tell you how proud I am. I was wrong. You've become, well, quite a thing." I blinked, heart thudding. "Thank you. That means more than you know." She sipped her chamomile. "I never thought I'd say this, but you've taught me now." December arrived with a swirl of snow and deadlines. I finalized the workbook manuscript and flew to Denver for the national ABC News segment on my pedagogical revolution. They filmed me in a school library, surrounded by chalkboards and excited students, acting out parts of my detective stories. The teaser aired the next week during the evening news. He taught the teachers how a kid dismissed as a hopeless grammar nerd wrote a billion-dollar textbook. Every YouTube comment beneath the clip was glowing. I cried when my daughter finally aced commas. My students love Grammar Sleuth. Thank you, Mr. James, for making English fun. I sat on the couch with my husband, Natalie, my partner of 5 years, a software engineer, and we toasted with hot cocoa. We did it, she said, bittersweet marshmallow on her lip. I nodded, thinking of my Yosemite backpacking trip with Lily next week. We did, but this is just the beginning. On New Year's Eve, we hosted a small gathering of family and friends by the fireplace. Willow, the golden retriever I've had since college, dozed at my feet. Bowls of spiced cider and homemade cookies lined the mantel. At midnight, we clinked glasses. I whispered a thank you to the universe, and to the doubt that fueled me. When the fireworks bloomed outside, Lily called out, "Connor, look." I rose to the porch, wrapped in a quilt, and took in the cascade of color over snowy fields. Mrs. Holloway stood beside me, her gloved hand resting on my shoulder. "You've brought light," she said quietly. "To me, to students, to the whole world." I smiled, catching her gaze. "Thank you for giving me that push." She squeezed my arm. "And thank you for proving me wrong." As the last spark faded into the night, I realized that the only labels that ever mattered were the ones we choose for ourselves. I was a writer, an educator, an author of a textbook that millions would open their hearts to. And one thing I would never be again was nothing. With that promise guiding me, I stepped back inside, ready to write the rest of my story.